I wore this headgear now for 6 months in sparring, and I have to admit it is pretty awesome. I mean, you can spar harder without your pretty visage getting mutilated, you'll always have an open ear to talk to, and it's going to be the best friend in your martial arts career. But then I realized something about my headgear that is pretty critical. And in this video I want to give you 3 tips when considering a headgear. And to find out what, we need to go 6 months down in the past together. So here we are. So it has been some years since I've started my martial arts journey. And prior to that I had a phase where I didn't do a lot of sports, not even thinking about martial arts, because I was doing like partying every weekend, maybe twice a week, drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, doing other fancy stuff that we're not talking here in the internet. But then I got into martial arts, and suddenly also the interest for fighting quickly rise, which was gonna happen eventually because I'm young, I'm dynamic, I want to do stuff, I want to brawl, spar, I want to experience all these different things. So I went up to my instructor and said, hey, I want to fight, what do I need? So and then he said, okay, you need headgear, you need groin cups, you need a mouth guard, you need some boxing gloves, and you're good to go. So what did I do? I just bought the headgear of my school, like everybody would do in the beginning, I think. And from then on, I went with this piece here. And something that I did not consider in the beginning, which leads us directly to the first tip, is the size of your headguard. So it should really feel like a pretty solid hug you get from your girlfriend or parents or whatever. And you have to also consider that in this piece here, you're going to sweat a lot and you're maybe also going to bleed. So it needs to be sticking to your head and not move around. Because with all the sweat and blood you're going to produce during sparring and fighting, it's going to be slippery, and you don't want your headgear to move around. And you definitely don't want to have this during one of your fights, because when that happens, you're going to be distracted, you're going to push around on your headguard, and you maybe have your hands down because you need to adjust, you don't see anything, you can't breathe, and then you are distracted, maybe get a punch or two, and maybe even get a knockout. So make sure that you always look that it fits when you buy a new headguard. Most manufacturers nowadays even have size charts, so you can look up them and maybe measure your head, your own fists and whatever, to really find the fit that is best for you. And for the next important realization I had during this time, we need to move a few weeks further. So after a couple of weeks I already had some experience, but I was still an absolute beginner and completely new to sparring, so to speak. And something that I was most certainly not aware of is this here. So energy management was something that I simply was not aware of, because I was always a little bit anxious about getting too far in or giving too much into that I could not go another round in. So I was holding myself back, and I'm still to this day. So the weeks have passed, and as I have given more and more thought and energy into sparring, I recognize that you come out of breath when you spar and fight. Which brings us to the second point we are looking in this video here: breathing. So obviously the structure of your headguard should not prevent you from breathing. As you see here, when you go closely, you see cushions that protect your cheeks from getting a blow. But when I now put the headguard on and I tighten it, as I said in the last tip, you also see that my cheeks here are going up, which is moving my face a little bit so that I cannot breathe as normally as I would, which is normal to a certain degree. But with this one here, I think it's a little bit extreme because it moves my mouth into a certain direction. Maybe it's also because of my beard, I don't know. Maybe you can let me know in the comments if you have experience with that when sparring with a headguard and a beard. And guys, always remember, fighting is 100 times harder than sparring, because you are always more involved when you are fighting. It is more energetically draining. You're producing adrenaline, cortisol, all the hormones. You are in that fight or flight mode most of the times when you take it seriously. And if you fight against your breath, you can't fight an opponent, plain and simple, period. So now, after we learned about the importance of breathing, my instructor completely changed the way he sparred me. And to experience that, we need to go together now to month 4. So I got better with experience, but I was still far away from being any good at sparring. The thing that I realized about the sparring style of my instructor was he was implementing more kicks and hooks. So he was using techniques that weren't just coming from the front view. And if you're having a headguard like this, where you also have a pretty solid grid here, which is good because it prevents you from getting hit here. You still can eye poke, yes, but the hits here usually don't go in. It also can prevent you from seeing things that are happening on the floor, e.g. kicks, or coming from the side view, so hooks, maybe elbows, maybe high kicks to the head. So this brings us now to the third point when considering a headgear: visibility. So there are like two types of headgear: the ones with a grade and the ones which we see in boxing, or we've used to see in boxing some years ago, that don't have a grade. The cool thing about this headgear here is that you can easily remove the grade, which then leaves you with a pretty solid boxing headgear that we saw a couple of years ago also in Olympic boxing. They are not using it anymore for a couple of reasons, but we can cover that in another video if you like. Let me know in the comments. So this here is pretty damn sure better for your visuals, because you can see better, you don't have a grade here. But the drawback you also have to consider is when you're doing something like kickboxing, muay thai, or a traditional martial art, where you're also going to have elbows, knees, kicks to the head, a face shield, or a grade can protect you big time. And by the way, this is the third type of headgear that we have, the ones with a transparent face shield, but for me personally they just look ridiculous. So this here pretty damn sure looks a little bit cooler without the grade, but you also have some serious advantages and drawbacks you have to consider. This is now respective to your style, that you can choose maybe to have one with a grade or without, depending on what rule set your fighting has. And this brings us now to the present, where I'm filming this YouTube video right now for you 6 months later. So to solve the mystery from the beginning why my instructor has this bleeding nose, that was because the grade hasn't had padding inside here. So why did this take place, you might ask? So that was because my instructor obviously was sweating during the sparring session we had, and the headguard was moving around, so it wasn't fitting properly. And because it wasn't fitting properly, the headguard made this movement here when he got a hit from me, and the grade directly went to his nose, which cut him open. And this is really not a good thing, because as I said, we are doing sparring, so we are not going full effort into. Go this little extra mile and do the research and look for the key points: fitting, breathing, and visibility. And if you have to spare money, it could be worth a thought to have one made custom for you. A lot of people do that, for example, with their mouth guard, because the teeth, as also the head, is something that is highly individual in size, form, and so on. And after all this talking about headguard, mouthguard, and sparring over the last couple of minutes, we now put it to the test, okay? You click the link now here on this side for the next video, and I am taking the headguard with me and we go sparring.